Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers who are focused on using crypto to bring positive some digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it and is published every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more, visit our website at greenpilled.network, where you can download the GreenPilled book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local greenpilled.network chapter. My guest today is Meg Lister. Meg is a Web3 product leader who has worked in crypto for 3 years. She was previously the VP of Product and DAO Ops at Flipside Crypto, where she led MetricsDao. In her previous life, Meg led new product launches in ad tech and e-commerce. Meg, on this episode, talks about Gitcoin Grants Stack, which is the new product which allows you to take the power of Gitcoin grants and deploy it to any EVM-based community. Basically a protocol and web app that allows you to determine what your community needs and deploy capital to what your community needs, starting with mechanisms like Quadratic Funding, but also featuring mechanisms like direct grants, which allow you to directly contribute to the grants in your ecosystem. So basically just taking the power of Gitcoin grants and putting it in the hands of any community. It's been 2 years, but Gitcoin has finally delivered a protocol that it feels good about and a product that it feels good about for putting the hands of Quadratic Funding into anyone's community. And I'm happy to say that it is now decentralized and modular, credibly neutral, and democratic, which is what we wanted to do when we shut down Gitcoin, the company, and Gitcoin Grants, the C Grants platform, centralized grants platform, and made it into a decentralized platform. So before we get into this episode, a disclaimer: I am a co-founder of Gitcoin. I actually built the first version of Gitcoin in my basement. And so in this episode, I play a little bit of podcast host, but I also break the fourth wall and just talk about Gitcoin stuff during the episode. Another disclaimer: I am a stakeholder in Gitcoin and I do hold GTC, but I am a big believer in Gitcoin's mission of funding what matters and want to see Gitcoin successful in the ecosystem. So I think this is an interesting episode if you are charting and coursing and learning about Gitcoin's evolution. If you're interested in funding what matters in your community, then this is an interesting episode for you. And also just charting the course of a company, Gitcoin Grants, becoming a DAO, and a product, a centralized product, becoming a decentralized modular protocol. It's an example of that. So if you're into those things, then I think you will enjoy this episode with Meg Lister. Peace.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
How you doing, Meg?
I'm great. How are you, Milwaukee?
Pretty good, thanks. Let's get into it. What is Gitcoin Grants Stack?
Oh, glad you asked. Gitcoin Grants Stack is a decentralized app that allows anyone to create, manage, and run a grants round. I almost said Quadratic Funding grants round there, and I stopped myself because yes, Quadratic Funding is our bread and butter, and we're going to talk about that all day today. But we're also supporting other mechanisms.
So basically, this is an app that anyone can run a Quadratic Funding round or a Gitcoin Grants round in, and I'm wondering how it works. So who are you targeting? Who's the product for?
Yeah. So we're targeting basically Web3 grants managers. If you are working on a project and you have a community that is looking for more ways to get involved and make their voices known in your ecosystem, or if you're trying to grow your community and find ways or things for people to do because you've just had an airdrop or an exciting event, or you're in the growth stage even, and you're trying to get projects funded and off the ground, a great solution for all of that is to run a grants round and to set up a grants program for your ecosystem. And if you're looking to do that, you're probably really excited and really overwhelmed because it's really hard to do and there's a lot of things to manage. And we're basically here to make your life easier.
How does it work? Say I'm running an ecosystem that has a treasury anywhere from tens of thousands of dollars to $1 billion treasury, and I want to deploy some of that through Grant Stack. how does that work?
Yeah. So first of all, if you've got $1 billion treasury, let's definitely talk. Right. First things first, you need, let's say, 10 minutes and a wallet. And you log in at manager.gitcoin.co, which is totally open. If you're a grants manager and you want to create a round, go there. If you just want to check it out to have fun, also go there and connect your wallet. We support a bunch of different chains and are always expanding. So you can choose to run on Ethereum, Optimism, PGN, et cetera, et cetera. And first things you do is you create a program, which is basically, hey, my name's Meg. I'm going to run grants with my friend Kevin. And I'm going to add both of our wallet addresses as admins. So great. Okay. Let's say that you're 90 seconds in and you're done setting up a program. So next thing you do is you set up a round. And a round is something that is basically constrained by time and money. So you set up the dates that you want to receive applications, the dates that you want to receive community donations, as well as commit in writing to the amount of funding that you want to provide, as well as the token you're going to use to provide funding. You check a couple of boxes that help you prevent bots and spam in your round. You click publish, and all of 5 to 10 minutes later, you've deployed a grants round on chain.
And so basically, once I have a grants round on chain, what can I do with it there?
Anything you want. But the first thing you probably want to do is to get people to apply to your round. So your round is going to go live on our grants homepage under the section for builders who are looking for grants programs or places where you might send builders in your community to apply for grants. So you're going to publish your project to start receiving applications. It'll live on the grants homepage at Gitcoin too, which is just some great publicity for your project and a great place for builders who are looking for opportunities in Web3 to go. Once you start receiving applications, you'll have kind of a swim lane in the Grants Stack manager for you to review those and either approve or reject them. And then once you've gotten through applications, the fun part starts. And this is where you engage your community to help decide where your grants funds actually go. And it's a really meaningful way for your community to participate. Everybody loves to have opinions on how money should be spent. And not only are they getting to make their voices heard, like you're, as a grants manager, getting to harness like the collective intelligence of your ecosystem to determine the best things to fund.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that. I feel like I've given the Quadratic Funding explainer a billion times before, and I'm wondering if you could just take us through how you explain what Quadratic Funding is and how it helps your community fund what matters.
I'm a big believer in Quadratic Funding, and I still feel like an imposter when I explain it, which is one of those things that probably a lot of other people feel when they're using it too. And so I'm always trying to remind myself that it's actually pretty simple at its core. So Quadratic Funding is a way for your community to make their voices heard in a way that's meaningful and significant because it involves money, but also doesn't allow money to steal the show. And so you're basically using your community's dollars as votes for where your matching fund should go. And so let's say that I am a donor who is super passionate about the ecosystem, and also I only have like $5 to spend. So I spend $1 across 5 different projects, and that's great. That counts as 1 vote for each of them. On the other hand, you are a donor with very deep pockets who also cares enormously about the ecosystem. And even though you can outspend me 100 to 1, you can't outvote me 100 to 1, because we take basically the square root of the donation that you make, and we count that as a vote. So if you donate $9 towards the same project, that's going to count as 3 votes.
So the broader the support, the bigger the match, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. And just real quick shout out to Zoe Hitzig, Glenn Weil, and Vitalik Buterin, who are the inventors of the mechanism, the brains behind Quadratic Funding. We're just one of the, Gitcoin is one of the apps in the ecosystem that builds on top of it. Always like to give a shout out to the mechanism designers when I talk about QF. So Gitcoin has funded 18 rounds of Gitcoin grants. As I understand it, according to impact.gitcoin.co, it's done $50 million worth of funding, 2 point something million transactions so far. And Grant Stack just allows me to take the power of that, what was working for the Ethereum ecosystem, and deploy it to my own DAO or EVM based community, is my understanding. Is that how you understand it?
Yeah, what I always tell people is Gitcoin did this thing over and over again and got really good at it. And also realized that while we got really good at it, everybody else was asking, hey, like, what can we learn from you guys? Can we use the things that you've built? Because we started out super early. I mean, you guys started out super early. I've been here 4 months. But trying to bootstrap and grow the Ethereum ecosystem. And then as parts of that ecosystem grew into their own, they were like, great, now we're going, it's like a Russian nesting doll of funding public goods. We're going to fund the next layer down in our ecosystem. And so it's such a like fulfilling and rewarding idea to me that we just keep funding and supporting these different layers of the ecosystem through different types of support and tooling. First through the original grants program, and then by actually giving some of the original recipients of that program the tools to do it themselves.
One of the things that I've always sort of liked or just found kind of fun is that the alumni of the grants programs, so, say you're Project X and you raised in Gitcoin around 2 through 5, you might now have $1 billion DAO and you're actually trying to allocate capital to your community. And we've seen a lot of those projects go back and give back to the main matching pool on the grants program, but then also have their own grants programs to pay forward. So there's sort of like a full cycle reciprocal relationship there.
Yeah, our first self-serve customer earlier this summer, they were amazing. And I had never worked with them before and was like, how did you guys get this idea? They said, oh, we've been funded through the Gitcoin Grants program years ago, and now we're growing our own ecosystem and paying it forward. So props to GeoWeb for doing that.
Yeah, that's cool. I really like the idea of bootstrapping an economy that's not just transactional. If you do X, I will do Y. But it's based off of these reciprocal social relationships where it's like you give without the expectation of return. And when that project succeeds, you share in that success in the future. I mean, it just feels very regen, which is what this podcast is all about. What's the grants program?
The grants program is kind of the historical backbone of Gitcoin that presented the idea and also the initial implementation and customer base for Grants Stack. So they're like the Grants Stack OGs in many cases. The grants program started out raising money to fund things that were important to Gitcoin community supporters. And now they do the exact same thing, but they use Grants Stack in order to do that.
Got it. So it's kind of like the showcase for the Grants Stack program. It's the biggest customer of Grants Stack right now. I'll be curious to see if it ever becomes not the biggest customer of Grants Stack, though, if it gets surpassed by someone else using it.
Yeah, I think that I want them to always be our best customer, but not our biggest customer, if that makes sense. The idea that we get to work so closely with a team that has such deep expertise in grants and gets to try all kinds of crazy things and fun, important things is just such an awesome advantage to have as a product manager working in the space. Yeah,
totally. Well, so Gitcoin Grants round 18 just happened, and that was run on top of Grants Stack. How do you feel like that went?
Pretty good, actually. I say this with the caveat that, hey, it's an early stage product. We launched publicly earlier this summer, like end of May, beginning of June. And so we're an early stage product that has early stage product growing pains. I've been joking with the team that this is our Pinocchio season. If you are a fan of animated Disney movies and have watched Pinocchio, you know the I want to be a real boy and we want to be a real product. We're cleaning up our code and our infrastructure and building things that are important to people, but really proud of the progress that we're making. We have made some really big steps since the last grants round too. And so when you're early like this, the more testing you can do, the more incremental progress that you can make, that's the stuff that makes me really confident that we're going to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so 18 rounds of grants and if 3 have been run on the new product, of which you've only been there for 1 or 1.5 or something like that, it feels like
1.25.
throwing you in the deep end. But yeah, it feels like so there's 15 rounds of product iteration that have happened in the past on the old platform, and then kind of Gitcoin declared bankruptcy and then moved everything over to the new product. So how does it feel to be I don't know, hitting zero and then sort of starting with a clean code base, but also, people are expecting features that used to be there that aren't there anymore. And, like, how's that reset felt?
Oh, it's been so strange, honestly. I've launched a lot of new products in my career. Like, I've done the 0 to 1 thing several times. And so when I walked into Gitcoin, I was like, great, I know how to do the 0 to 1 thing and I can do it again. And I totally, just personally as a product manager, like, underestimated the history that comes with the Gitcoin Grants program and the old platform. And so in many, many ways, it's such an advantage for our product that people come back and use it again and again, that they're so invested, that they have such great ideas. And also the expectations that people have at this point is so wild to me or wild's the wrong word to use it. The expectations that people have are sometimes reflective of a product that's been around for a long time versus the product that I know in recent history that launched publicly in June. And so making sure that we respect the needs of the community that has been around for so long and balance that with all of the traditional things in early stage product development is definitely challenging.
Yeah. I see you out there fielding some questions on Twitter, just like all of people's expectations for the grants rounds, whether they're rooted in the old product or just in imagination and stuff like that. And so I see you out there like really leading in front and engaging with the community. And I just like appreciate that you're getting out there and hearing all the feedback. And people are really engaged during Gitcoin grants rounds. I think it's because it's been such a funding source for people for many years, but it's also hard to go from 15 rounds of progress down to 0 and sort of decline from that local maxima up to that global maxima. I don't really have a question, but if you have any comments on that, let me know.
Oh yeah, it's one of the things that has struck me the most is just the faith that the Gitcoin community has placed in the DAO and the team to do that. And I really don't take that lightly. To say, hey, we've built something that works, but we're going to rip it up because we think there's something better out there. Wow, like that's the kind of community that I want to be part of.
Long-term focused decision, but I mean, I guess, I've been trying to like sit here in podcast host mode and just ask questions about it, but maybe I'll just like break the fourth wall right now and just say that as someone who was involved in making that decision to decline that local maxima from C grants, centralized grants, down to D grants, we felt really like public goods funding infrastructure should be credibly neutral and democratic. And if it was going to be a company and a platform, then it could never be that way. Also, there's a lot of spaghetti code that I wrote when I was just trying to figure out what Gitcoin was. And so hitting reset and having a new code base that was open source, decentralized, and modular was like the new hill that we were trying to climb there. And so that's why we felt like it was appropriate to reset and go down to decline that local maxima and then start climbing the new decentralized modular global maxima. I'm really excited for the point in which that becomes like an obvious choice in hindsight, because it's been a lot of pain of like 24 months rewriting the entire organization, not to like the whole product, but not to mention the organization to make that happen.
Yeah, I can't imagine, honestly. Like, again, I've been here for 4 months. And so part of me is already feeling though like, oh, wow, early stage product development is really hard. And having worked on startup products for a long time, it's super painful to do that. And again, just really respect and admire how much the community has come along for the ride and been willing to support such an inspirational and also like long game of a mission.
Yeah, well, public goods funding is, I feel like people think it's this like altruistic hippy dippy thing that you just do it for good, and it is that in some ways, but it's also, I mean, I think the stat is that there's trillions of dollars of capital deployed by governments and NGOs and to open source software developers across the world, and so I actually think it's like a really interesting market that people don't see. So really excited to see how it grows, and now that anyone can just take the power of Gitcoin grants and put it into their DAO EVM based community, then I'll be curious to see how it grows and what kind of different communities use it.
Yeah, not just what different kinds of communities use it, but I want people to use it in like really weird ways too, or like really unexpected ways. Um, I had a like mental breakthrough a couple of months ago when we internally were doing some testing and we were like, oh, we just deployed on PGN. We need to test running rounds on this new network. And so we're going to launch a meme contest. And it was the most fun thing I've done at work in, I don't know, a year. And just understanding the ways that quadratic funding can be used to not only fund open source software and public goods, but just memes in ways that like truly connect and engage communities is so cool.
Yeah, it's funny where like in crypto and in open source software, memes and shit posts can be a public good. If you're like the whole idea here is fund what matters, right? So if what matters to your community is having a dank meme game, then maybe that's something that you fund.
That's true. I keep threatening to fund a cute cat pictures round too.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Promise or threat? I don't know. What so tell me about, you sort of teased at the top of the episode, Gitcoin started with quadratic funding, but it's sort of becoming more of a Swiss Army knife of different mechanisms. Tell me about that. What's the plan there?
So as ecosystems grow, and also just as our knowledge and expertise on grants funding and ecosystem growth grows itself, one of the things that we've realized is, hey, many jobs, many tools. And so to use your Swiss Army knife analogy, sometimes you've got a job that requires the tiny scissors, and sometimes you've got a job that requires the tiny tweezers. And not all ecosystems are created alike. Not all ecosystems are at the same stage, which is all to say that quadratic funding is a fantastic tool, but not the only one that you can or should use. And so we are working to introduce different types of funding mechanisms and help organizations deploy them at the right stage for them. And so, for instance, we just ran a round with Phantom. They came to us and said, hey, we want to run a quadratic funding round, and had an episode in their community where a bridge was hacked and they didn't feel comfortable asking their community to donate funds. And so instead, we spun up a quadratic voting round for them, which they've gotten super high engagement and has been super successful so far. So great example of an alternative mechanism making an impact. We're also introducing direct grants, which is an opportunity for communities to give back to projects that are funding a specific initiative or making a specific or prescribed impact, and is a great way to get things moving when an ecosystem starts out, or to drive prescriptive asks that are surfaced by the community, maybe elsewhere in quadratic funding rounds.
It feels like if quadratic funding is a screwdriver, I'm just going to continue the Swiss Army knife analogy here. If quadratic funding is a screwdriver, then the idea is to build sort of a multi-tool that can be used for different things depending on how your community wants to allocate capital to what it needs.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm. So is this Swiss Army knife going to have 3 to 5 different multi-tools on it in a few years, or is it going to have 100? Like, how many different allocation tools are there?
So who knows what the future holds? Like, the thing that I am most committed to is building what communities and ecosystems need to be successful. That said, my running thesis is that over the next, we'll call it like 1 to 3 years, we'll probably support 3 to 5 funding mechanisms. And maybe some like permutations of each of those funding mechanisms. So not just quadratic funding, but retroactive quadratic funding. And the reason for that is that the grants ecosystem is growing and super promising, but still pretty immature, I think, in having success metrics, in having playbooks that people rely on, and processes that they know work. And so rather than introducing 100 mechanisms over the next 1 to 3 years, we really want to support people having viable workflows and being able to measure the impact of what they're funding, and feeling more kind of strategically competent in the programs they're running.
Mm-hmm. So it feels like doing a couple of them and doing them well over building a bunch of hundreds of them is kind of where your head's at. But I'll be curious to like invite you back in a year or two and see which parts of the Swiss Army knife are most used by grants program managers.
Yeah, I will be too. If I've learned anything in crypto, it's to get really comfortable with being wrong.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about it. But I feel like my learning velocity has increased a lot by being in crypto. And I know you've been in a couple different positions in the crypto space, so there's a lot of learnings that come from that.
Yeah, totally.
Can you talk about Allo protocol?
Yeah, so Allo protocol is like the unsung hero of Grants Stack. We are built on top of Allo protocol, and it makes everything happen on chain. And so we, just like I was talking about the program being hopefully the best but not the biggest customer of Grants Stack, Grants Stack hopes to be the best but not the biggest customer of Allo protocol, in that we hope we provide a way for people to see what's possible in terms of different funding mechanisms they can use, in terms of the power of funding what matters to your community, and go forth and build additional apps on top of Allo protocol.
Yeah, and what does Allo protocol stand for?
Allocation protocol.
Okay. There you go.
Did I pass?
I have some people that they're like Allo, like the plant. It's like, no, capital allocation. I'm a mechanism.
When I first heard it, I thought like a French person was saying hello.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess. Wouldn't a French person saying hello be the bonjour protocol though?
Well, maybe they're trying to do English, but with a French accent.
Hello. Okay. All right. I see where we're going here. This is a good pun to make in an audio version of a podcast. So if I'm interested in prototyping Grants Stack in my own community, how do I get in touch with you? What kind of people are you interested in hearing from at this point?
I am literally interested in hearing from anybody who's got something to fund. So if you are trying to figure out how to get more people building on top of your project, or trying to figure out how to get your community to weigh in more about what matters to them, would love to talk about running grants for your community. You can find me on Twitter at Meg Lister. You can also find me and our team on our Gitcoin.co website, where you'll find links to Grants Stack and to schedule a demo or get in touch with us.
Got it. Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say about Grants Stack, Gitcoin, Web3?
One thing that I never want to leave a conversation without emphasizing is people always ask, hey, how much do you have to spend on grants for them to be successful? And my answer is like, I don't know, $1,000? Like if you can dig up some meaningful change from the couch cushions, you can run grants. And just getting started somewhere and starting the process of engaging your community on this is always better to do with a little money earlier on than waiting till later.
Just like a crawl, walk, run kind of approach to deploying capital in your community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What have been some of your favorite projects to work with?
Oh gosh, it's like picking my favorite baby. Or
yeah, that's true. Well, not your favorite, but what are some ones that come to mind since you can't pick a favorite band or baby or anything like that?
So I've only been here for a couple of months, but I'll also name some Gitcoin historical things that I thought were really cool and reasons why I came on board. The first one is UNICEF. The idea that these novel funding mechanisms resonate with people outside of crypto is super interesting to me. Also knowing that Gitcoin has historically funded some upstart projects that are now huge names in the ecosystem, like Bankless and Uniswap and DYDX. Again, really great proof points in the power of quadratic funding. I have a couple of conversations going with other great organizations in the ecosystem that I'm afraid if I say it on a podcast, something's going to happen and something bad will happen to their grants round, so I won't name them. But there are some really exciting, awesome rounds coming on Grants Stack this fall.
I gotta say, this is a special pleasure to ask you all the questions that I usually get asked about Gitcoin. So maybe I'll turn it around. I'll turn the mic around and I'll let you play host for a minute or two. But is there anything you want to ask me or anything else I didn't ask that you want to say?
I'll ask you the classic product manager question since you had my job for so long. What's one thing that you would change or do differently about Grants Stack if you were in my shoes?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know if you know when I got off of my judgment, because I might build it centralized and with a bunch of spaghetti code. At least 2019 Kevin would have done that. Although that was before Gitcoin had found product market fit, and we were like a team of 5, and we were really scrappy and just trying to figure out where we would have product market fit. But I'll say that like the thing I always tried to do was build a experimentation and iteration machine. So Gitcoin was one of 6 side projects that I had. And then when I realized it had legs, like everyone in Web3 was going to need developers, then I doubled down on it. I went full time on it. I was also lucky enough to get funding by Joe Lubin. And back then the product was bounties, which is like, if you do X, then I will give you Y tokens, Gitcoins. It was like you were getting coins there. And again, we in the bull market of 2017, we launched 4 or 5 different products. We were like NFTs and ethical ads and hackathons, and we launched Kernel. And so we had this sort of like flowering of different experiments. And then the bear market happened. We had to prioritize, and it ended up being hackathons and grants that we prioritized. So we doubled down on grants, and grants went from like being a subscription product where you could subscribe to your favorite projects to being Quadratic Funding. And then Gitcoin Grants round 1 and 2, we entered this OODA loop in which we were just experimenting with how to do the most effective quadratic funding for the community. And it was just this loop of like observe, orient, decide, and then act every quarter as we were running out of grants round. We built this like experimentation machine where we would just double down on what's working and, like release our sunk costs on what wasn't working. And so we're not only 18 iterations deep on Gitcoin Grants now, but there was iterations before that on the products where we had to like traverse the design space by going through an OODA loop. And so I think that's the most important thing if you're going to build a culture of innovation, is just building that OODA loop and that like metronome, that cadence with the community in which you're fucking around and you're finding out, and like repeatedly. So I know that you're doing that, and so it's not something that I would do differently, but I want the audience to see the sort of like OODA loop of iteration and experimentation. And especially when there's controversy on Twitter about Gitcoin fucking something up, Gitcoin only makes the same mistake once, and then it fixes it the next round. So it's like a infinite evolutionary game of finding the global maxima of public goods funding in my mind. So I don't know, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that resonates a lot. Both in the necessity of iterating throughout the product maturity cycle. Like we've talked a lot about how Grants Stack is kind of a mature product in some ways and kind of an early stage product in some ways.
Oh.
And regardless, you still got to try a bunch of stuff out and iterate and experiment a ton. One thing that I'm curious, particularly since you brought up the transition from centralized to decentralized software, is that experimentation loop in a decentralized community and context. One of the things that, I love decentralized communities. I've been working in DAOs for years. And one of the things that bugs me is that DAOs feel slow sometimes. Like, how do you recognize or reconcile like the slowness of decentralization and decision-making with this need for fast experimentation?
Yeah. Oh, this is fun. You're like fully podcast hosting now. Do you want to do it?
Cool.
Actually, while we're at it.
This is what it's like.
Yeah, no, it's easier to ask questions than to be the answer sometimes. Okay, so I think that slowness is a feature in some parts of the protocol or in the world. So like when you want something to be credibly neutral and dependable, you want it to be slow. You don't want it to be changing a lot because it can fuck something up. So Allo protocol being immutable and deployed on chain, I think is like the slowness of that is a feature, right? But it's only a feature once it's hit product market fit and it's able to hit scale, and it's like an anti-fragile hyperstructure, right? And so early stage startups are all about iteration and hitting that OODA loop where maybe you're deploying protocols, but you're doing like Uniswap V1, V2, V3. You're doing Gitcoin Grants V1, V2. Actually, Allo protocol I think is going to be on V2 soon. And so you want to have that like iteration loop when you're pre-product market fit and moving quickly. And I guess there's advantages and disadvantages to decentralization. In the early Gitcoin days, when there was a product bug, like I'm just posting up in front of my computer, I'm having a glass of whiskey and I'm deploying straight to prod in order to fix it. And like I can contain it all in my head because I'm the founder and lead engineer. But that's not possible in in a decentralized ecosystem. But now, because it's decentralized and modular, ideally you could have different people that own different modules in the community, and you can kind of like break apart and separate concerns and like do more things at the same time, because it's a super modular ecosystem, right? You have contained scope and leadership, but everything fits together in a way. And so I think that in a way you can go faster because more people can like parallel process things. It's almost like that old trope: if you want to go fast, go yourself, but if you want to go far, go together. But I don't know, sometimes it doesn't always feel that way when it just takes coordination across multiple people in order to get something done. But I guess that's why we have great product managers to do stuff now.
Or at least very busy product managers.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd love to ask the community too, since we have so many great listeners, is this is something you and I have been talking a lot about, like the challenge of building something that feels cohesive, that has the great UX that our community has been consistently asking for, and also allows for this modularity and like see feature, ship feature. And so if anybody knows other examples of open source software or kind of people building decentralized front ends that are doing this really well, I'd love to hear about them. I'd love to talk to them.
Yeah.
You should write them on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what this podcast is for exploring and learning sort of the frontier. And one of the things is shipping products that other people can use, but it's also about building cultures that work in DAOs and work practices that work in DAOs and Web3. And being on the frontier is unlike being in the metropolis, where you can kind of depend on a ton of infrastructure. There's a certain amount of just being comfortable with ambiguity and not having a lot of infrastructure that you have to have on the frontier. And the working practices we're discovering the meta as we go along. But the more we can share it with each other, I think it's really fun. And it's a really exciting time to be alive and be exploring the design space.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, for sure. Never a dull moment. Let's do some outro questions here. What is your favorite public good?
Libraries.
Libraries. Okay. Is that, those have, what are they called? Books?
Oh,
Books?
yeah. Those are pieces of paper. They're all glued together, actually.
Okay. So it's like Twitter, but over 100 years.
Yeah. And sometimes people are a little less angry.
Who's a political philosopher that really inspires you?
In particular with public goods funding, Elinor Ostrom.
Mm-hmm. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so Elinor Ostrom really reopened the conversation about funding the commons and the commons as public goods in her work as a professor of economics at Indiana University. And I am a public goods nerd going back several decades now. I wrote a senior thesis in college about community forests as public goods and got to interview Professor Ostrom, which was an academic highlight.
Oh, cool. Wow. Well, I know I had Griff on the podcast, and he's a big fan of the 8 principles for managing the commons. And we actually have a podcast coming up about Elinor Ostrom. So,
oh, no way.
Teaser for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite mechanisms for determining our values, especially like collective decision making?
Rock, paper, scissors.
Oh, there you go. A random chance decision making, but at least it's yeah. All right. Well, these are all the popcorn questions I can think of on the moment. But Meg, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Congrats on all the progress on Grant Stack, and looking forward to building this movement with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Peace and love. You just heard from Meg Lister. I'm excited about chatting with her because it's interesting to see the evolution of Gitcoin grants going forward, the evolution of Gitcoin's mission to funding what matters, and the ability for anyone to deploy Gitcoin grants in their own community. Thanks for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. Again, this podcast features the people who are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. Really excited about Meg because I think that she is doing that and Gitcoin is doing that. But again, I'm biased as a founder of Gitcoin, and disclaimer, I hold GTC. If you value our work, please make an offering to our algorithmic overlords. Please subscribe, rate, and review. This really helps with helping other people find the Regen Web3 movement and to find the GreenPilled.network resource. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review as you're closing out this podcast. Peace and love, and I will see you next time.